What is your definition of poverty?
Living without proper resources to survive.
Like, if someone is impoverished, they don't have all the resources they need to, like, live a balanced life.
It's like the state in which someone lives below a certain economic line.
Like people who are getting paid less than minimum wage and they can't provide for themselves or their family.
Poverty. It's a word that holds immense weight on a global scale, that shapes policies and conflicts, divides people, and comes with a stigma that is often used to define someone's worth. For a word of such magnitude, you would think the definition should be universal and solidified, but it's not. The definition of poverty is ambiguous, altered among different nations, different cities, and different people. We believe that poverty should be defined as the lack of capabilities to live a fulfilling life in one specific community due to factors outside of their control. We believe poverty should be measured using a modified form of the HDI that measures the maximum amount of central capabilities possible. We do not intend to replace or neglect the OPM or SPM. What does all of that mean? Let's break it down. The OPM, also known as the official poverty measure of the U.S., was developed in the 1960s. The OPM compares gross cash income to 3 times the economy food plan, or a minimum food diet. This threshold for poverty may have worked in 1960, when those who were poor spent an average of 1/3 of their income on food, but now only 1/6 of income is spent on food. The income measure is also flawed because it does not factor non-cash income or outside expenses into the equation. In addition, under the OPM, the family unit is defined strictly as those related by blood. As a result, foster children, the homeless, college kids, prisoners, and more effectively disappear from the measurement. Since it has been around since the 1960s and it has never been updated or altered, there is a consistent stream of data on poverty, which can serve as a comparison to future years. Also, it is the easiest measure to conduct and understand, as it works with an absolute definition of poverty, not having enough cash income, and it is an absolute measure of poverty, meaning it doesn't change based on what others around it have. The OPM also does not consider the fact that poverty is related to social standing and environment, as it is not adjusted based on geographic area. According to Marta Sen, to ignore or deny the connection between society and views of poverty or deprivation is, quote, not so much to be super objective, but to be super dense, end quote. This is because of the lack of opportunities or the severity of a hardship varies based on the community one is in. If you live in a really rich community, there are more variables as to what one needs to be seen as an acceptable member, such as nice clothes or a car, versus if you live in a poorer area where you will need less to be seen as an average member of society. The standard of living, or the cost of buying what you need to be an active member in society, varies in price and in appearance, so the standard of appearing as a member of society cannot be generalized to all communities. The SPM, which serves as a measurement tool used in addition to the OPM, operates based on the definition of poverty of being a lack of basic necessities, which they state is FCSU, food, clothing, shelter, and utilities. As a quasi-relative measure, the SPM does not analyze what people have in general, so it is not a relative measure of poverty. It does, however, measure in comparison to the basic necessities. The poverty threshold set by the SPM is the 33rd percentile of the median expenditure on FCSU in any given area, so it is adjusted geographically. It also counts in-kind benefits, or sources of income that are not cash, such as TANF, SNAP, Social Security, and EITC. The SPM factors in taxes being withdrawn, as well as MOOPs, or medical out-of-pocket expenses, and withdraws non-discretionary work-related expenses like transportation and childcare. The family unit, according to the SPM, is not strictly defined by blood, but rather by people living in the same place, who will therefore most likely to be sharing resources. It also helps to provide information about whether government programs, like those in-kind benefits, work to lift people out of poverty, which the OPM does not. While the OPM is important for consistent data and the SPM is important for evaluating government programs, there are aspects lacking from both measurements. If someone inherited a large sum of money and then spent it all on luxuries and unnecessary items, would you consider them poor? No, especially not in comparison to someone who spends their money wisely but still cannot afford all the necessary expenses needed to live a dignified human life in their given society. Or let's consider this situation proposed by Sen, the difference between fasting and starving. In both cases, one is not achieving a basic level of nutrition, but one is choosing to do so, and the other has no choice. Someone who's fasting does not lack the ability to be well nourished, whereas someone who is starving does. This idea is furthered in the concept of poverty being based on income inadequacy, not income lowness. Income inadequacy is the failure to convert income into reaching necessary capability thresholds, whereas income lowness is simply having little income. Consider two people. One has a decent amount of income, but a medical condition that requires expensive surgery and medicine. The other has a lower income, but no medical expenses. Person 2 technically has income lowness in comparison to person 1, but because of person 1's excessive medical needs, they lack enough income to dedicate towards other capabilities. This is a real-life complication, as according to the SPM in 2018, MOOPs added around 8 million people to those in poverty. These 8 million people did not have an income that fell below the poverty threshold, but when their extreme medical expenses were taken into account, they did lack sufficient income to sustain a fulfilling life.
Originally developed as concepts by Amartya Sen, the capabilities theory describes poverty in terms of a person's freedom or lack of freedom to choose their own destiny. Capabilities, as seen here, are what you can do. They're the set of options available to a person based on environment, free time, access, income, and many other factors. Functionings are what that person actually chooses to do from their set of capabilities. For example, someone could have the capabilities to pursue a career in professional soccer or a career as a programmer, but choose the functioning of becoming a programmer. Nussbaum's central capabilities are an extension and further development of Sen's capabilities theory. These are the 10 most important capabilities that she believes are essential for a life worthy of the dignity of a human being. Number 1 is life, the ability to live and to be alive. Number 2, bodily health, the right to be healthy and to have access to what you need to be healthy. Bodily integrity, freedom from assault or from slavery or anything that infringes on your bodily integrity. Senses, imagination, and thought, the ability to develop your creativity and your sense of who you are and your intelligence. Emotions, the ability to exercise emotions freely and to have a healthy sense of your emotions. Practical reason, the development of your intelligence again, and affiliation, the ability to be a part of society with other people. This has 2 subsets. Other species, the capability of interacting with other species and understanding them and knowing that you are part of the natural world. Play, recreational activity and fun. Lastly, we have control over one's environment, which comes in 2 flavors, political control and material control. The Human Development Index is a tool used by nations around the world and non-governmental organizations to classify the development level of a particular country. It is maintained and updated every year by the United Nations Development Program, and it's a critical base for our new poverty assessment measure. We're trying to quantify things that are hard to quantify. You can't put all of this into numbers. So qualitative things like creativity, play, enjoyment of life are replaced by numbers, quantitative measurements. Life expectancy at birth is one of the 3 measurements that is put into the Human Development Index. The second measurement is years of schooling. The last thing is gross national income per person. They take the entire national income and divide it among every person who lives in the nation. The Human Development Index is a good measurement for some capabilities, but for the purposes of assessing all capabilities, it is inadequate. So our measurement aims to correct that by expanding the capabilities from the Human Development Index and adding other capabilities to make this a more accurate measurement of the fulfillment of human beings. We believe that to live a fulfilling human life, or one worthy of human dignity, means possessing all 10 of the central capabilities. Our measure is highly relative and discursive, using proxies to gather data on as many of the 10 central capabilities as possible. We chose to measure life by the Human Development Index's measure of life expectancy in a country. We would like to measure bodily health in the average relative cost of healthcare and health insurance in a location, and healthcare facilities that are accessible. We chose to measure bodily integrity in reported assault and sexual assault rates. Senses, imagination, and thought was based on education access. The Human Development Index's baseline of average years of schooling is a decent placeholder. In addition, we also wanted to measure access to public libraries. We measure emotions in the amount and access of counseling services and mental health care facilities. In addition, a possible survey of public attitudes toward emotional expression would be a good support for this. Practical reason, we chose to use average years of schooling and the quality of that schooling, including graduation rates, eventual outcomes in life including income, teacher quality, resources available to the school, and test scores. For affiliation, which is very hard to measure, we chose to look at the rate of hate crimes because those affect people's ability to not have to feel shame and not be discriminated against. And we also proposed supplementing this with a survey of perceived prejudice in the community. Because regardless of the amount of shame or not, if people feel shame, the problem is still there. Other species, we decided to use parks per square mile as a placeholder for this because the more green spaces are in existence in an area, the more opportunities people have to interact with nature and become closer to it. For play, we chose to just survey people's free time after their work and chores. This is extremely discursive, highly subjective, but play is important to human functioning and joy. Finally, for control over one's environment, discussing political control, we decided to rate voting access and restrictive or non-restrictive voter ID laws in an area. Also, distance from polling places can affect people's ability to vote. We also proposed a summary of freedom and democracy indexes, including the Polity Data Series, the Freedom in the World Index, and the EIU Democracy Index. A summary of these is a decent placeholder value for the amount of personal political freedom in a country.
Why our measure, you may ask? We recognize that our definition of poverty is much more discursive and relative than those used by the OPM and the SPM, and our measure is even more complicated than the SPM, OPM, and HDI. But, as Sen said, the first step is not to think of what is possible or easy, but rather what should be done, how poverty should be defined, even if it is astonishingly complicated, how it should be measured, even if it is extremely time-consuming and consists of numerous proxies. Our measure serves as an additional measurement tool to the OPM, SPM, and HDI. We do not intend to replace or stop the use of any of those because they each provide their own beneficial data. But with our holistic approach to measuring as many central capabilities as possible in any given area, we hope to provide insight to local, state, and federal governments, as well as corporations, about which areas of dignified human life need attention in terms of policy. Measuring the unmeasurable is a tremendous endeavor, and we recognize that. But we believe that the effort will be worth it in knowledge we gain and the commitment we demonstrate to ensuring freedom from poverty.